Picture a tired man standing under the harsh fluorescent lights of a crowded grocery store. His hair is unkempt, his eyes sunken from too many sleepless nights. And in his arms, a small baby wrapped in a faded pink blanket whimpers softly, hungry, her tiny hand clutching the collar of his worn jacket. His name is Jake, and today he is not here to shop like everyone else. Today he is here to beg. Have you ever felt the weight of the world pressing on your shoulders while you're trying to smile for someone who needs you to be strong? That's how Jake feels as he stands in the baby formula aisle, clutching an empty bottle, his fingers trembling. He looks at the rows of formula cans lined neatly on the shelves, their bright colors mocking him, reminding him of how much he doesn't have, how far he is from giving his daughter what she needs. Jake's wife died the day their daughter was born, leaving him with a promise he didn't know how to keep. He promised to protect their child, to keep her safe, to love her enough for both of them. But promises don't pay for milk, and love doesn't fill an empty bottle. The people around him don't see him. They walk past, pushing carts filled with groceries, laughing, talking about weekend plans, living lives that feel like a distant dream to him now. Jake's eyes dart around, searching for help, for a miracle, for a sign that the world isn't as cruel as it feels right now. Then he sees her, a woman standing a few feet away watching him. Her hair is tied back neatly, her eyes kind but sad, as if she knows what it's like to stand in a grocery store feeling like you're about to break. Her name is Emily, and in that moment, when their eyes meet, something shifts. She steps closer, her hands reaching out gently. "Let me help," she says softly. Jake wants to refuse, wants to protect his pride, but the soft cry of his baby breaks him. His lips tremble, and for a moment, he can't speak. He looks into Emily's eyes, searching for judgment, but finds only warmth, only understanding. Have you ever had a stranger step into your life at the exact moment you were about to give up? Because what Emily did next would change everything for Jake and his daughter. Stay with me, because in the next few minutes, you will see how a single act of kindness can ripple through a life, how one moment in a grocery store can become the start of a new story. A story of hope, of healing, of filling the empty space called mom. Before we continue, let us know where you're watching from and what time it is right now in the comments below, because you're part of this story too. Jake didn't remember walking home that evening. The city lights blurred as he pushed the stroller down cracked sidewalks, the cold wind biting at his hands. His daughter slept, her tiny face pressed against the edge of her blanket, her small breath visible in the cold night air. Jake's mind was elsewhere, stuck in that moment in the grocery store when Emily stepped forward, when she took the empty bottle from his shaking hand and filled it without hesitation. Have you ever felt so grateful it hurt, yet ashamed that you needed help at all? Jake felt that as he watched Emily cradle his daughter while warming the bottle with practiced hands. She held the baby with a tenderness that Jake recognized immediately, the kind of tenderness his wife once had, the kind that made a child feel safe. For a moment, standing in that fluorescent-lit aisle, Jake saw something he hadn't seen in a long time: hope. But hope was dangerous. Hope made you believe you could do this alone, that you could keep every promise, that you could be enough. Jake had spent months trying to be enough. After his wife passed away during childbirth, leaving him with a baby girl and a promise to protect her, Jake quit his job at the auto shop because daycare was too expensive and no one could care for her the way her mother would have. He tried to fix cars in the alley behind their apartment, using borrowed tools, taking jobs that paid in cash and leftover groceries. Some days it was enough. Most days it wasn't. Rent notices piled up, the heater broke and stayed broken, and Jake learned to live with the constant fear of failing the one person who needed him most. Have you ever woken up in the middle of the night, checking to make sure someone you love is still breathing, terrified that if you close your eyes, you might lose them? That was Jake's every night. He would sit by the crib whispering promises to his sleeping daughter, promises that tomorrow would be better, that he would find a way to get her medicine, that he would find a way to keep the lights on, that he would find a way to feed her. But that day in the grocery store, when he stood there with an empty bottle and an emptier wallet, Jake felt the crushing weight of every promise he hadn't been able to keep. And then there was Emily. Emily had her own story, one she rarely shared, one that lived behind the quiet sadness in her eyes. She once had a family, a baby she lost too soon, a marriage that couldn't survive the grief that followed. Now she moved through her days trying to find pieces of herself, volunteering at shelters, helping strangers because it was the only way she knew how to keep going. When she saw Jake in that store, she didn't see a man begging for milk. She saw a father who would do anything for his child, a man who was holding on by a thread, refusing to let go because letting go wasn't an option. "Your daughter is beautiful," Emily had said softly as she handed the bottle back to Jake, warm and full, ready to quiet the baby's hungry cries. Jake had tried to thank her, but the words caught in his throat. Instead, he held his daughter close, letting her drink, watching as Emily's eyes softened with memories of her own child. Jake wanted to walk away, to protect the fragile walls he had built around himself, to keep his life as small and controlled as possible. But Emily didn't walk away. She stayed, asking if he needed a ride home, asking if he needed anything else. Have you ever met someone who looked at your struggle and didn't flinch, who didn't pity you but saw you, really saw you? Jake didn't know it yet, but Emily was about to become the person who would change everything, the person who would stand beside him when the world felt too heavy, the person who would teach him that sometimes letting someone in isn't a weakness. It's the bravest thing you can do. What Emily offered next would leave Jake speechless, and it would change the life of a single dad who was just trying to keep a promise. Jake sat in the small kitchen of his one-room apartment, the hum of the old fridge filling the silence as he fed his daughter warm formula, the kind Emily had bought for them the day they met. The baby's tiny fingers curled around his thumb as she drank, her eyes closing slowly, trusting him completely, unaware of the weight pressing on his shoulders. Have you ever held something so precious in your arms while feeling like the world outside was ready to take it all away? That's how Jake felt every day. Rent was overdue. The landlord's voice had lost its patience, knocking on the door harder each morning. The heater had given up weeks ago, leaving them to sleep under piles of blankets, their breath visible in the cold dawn light. Jake worked on cars whenever he could, taking small repair jobs in the alley behind the building. But it was never enough, and every dollar he made slipped away to formula, diapers, and the electricity bill that was already past due. Emily started showing up after that day in the store. At first it was just small things, dropping off a bag of groceries, slipping diapers into the stroller when Jake wasn't looking, bringing warm coffee when she found him in the alley working on an old car in the cold. She always smiled, her eyes warm but sad, like she knew exactly how it felt to live with a quiet ache in your chest. Jake didn't want to accept her help. He didn't want to let her in. But Emily didn't wait for him to ask. She helped because she wanted to, because something about Jake and his daughter pulled at the part of her that still believed in second chances, that still believed in hope. One evening, Emily found Jake sitting on the curb outside the apartment, his head in his hands, his daughter crying softly in the stroller beside him. She didn't ask questions. She didn't push. She simply sat down beside him, the two of them watching the streetlights flicker to life as the sun dipped below the buildings. Have you ever felt like you're failing, no matter how hard you try? Jake's voice was barely a whisper. Emily looked at him, her eyes glistening under the streetlight. "Every single day," she said softly. She told him about her daughter, about the tiny hospital room where she spent months praying for a miracle that never came, about the day she left the hospital with empty arms and a heart that would never fully heal. She told him about how her husband left, unable to handle the grief that swallowed them whole, about the silence of a house that was meant to be filled with laughter and tiny footsteps. Jake listened, the heaviness in his chest shifting into something different, something softer. Emily's pain was different, but somehow it felt the same. Have you ever found yourself sharing your deepest hurt with a stranger because you knew they would understand? That night, Emily didn't leave. She helped Jake carry the stroller up the narrow stairs, settled his daughter into the crib, and sat on the floor with Jake, both of them leaning against the peeling paint of the wall, the soft hum of the baby's breathing, the only sound between them. Days turned into weeks. Emily became a constant presence, a quiet support Jake didn't know he needed. She showed him how to apply for food assistance, how to find community clinics for the baby's checkups, how to fix the heater with a borrowed part so the apartment would finally be warm again. Jake found himself smiling more, laughing when his daughter giggled, letting himself believe that maybe, just maybe, things could get better. And then it all came crashing down. Jake was under a car in the alley, changing a rusted brake line for a neighbor who paid him in cash in leftover stew when he heard the screech of tires and the sickening thud of metal on metal. He scrambled out just in time to see a car spinning, hitting the curb, the driver's head slamming against the window before the car came to a stop. Jake didn't think. He ran to the car, pulling the door open, dragging the driver, a young man barely conscious, out of the wreck. The smell of gasoline filled the air and Jake pulled the man away just as the engine burst into flames. Sirens wailed in the distance and Jake stood there, covered in blood and oil, as the paramedics arrived, as the police asked him questions, as neighbors watched from their windows. He didn't realize he was hurt until he tried to walk and collapsed, the world going dark around him. When Jake woke up in the hospital, Emily was there, holding his daughter, rocking her gently as she hummed softly. His daughter's tiny hand clutched Emily's necklace, her face calm and peaceful. Jake tried to sit up, wincing at the pain in his side, and Emily was there, helping him, her eyes filled with tears. "What happened?" Jake croaked. "You saved him," Emily whispered, brushing a strand of hair from his forehead. "You saved that boy." Jake closed his eyes, exhaustion washing over him. But even through the pain, he felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. Pride. Have you ever done the right thing, even when it cost you everything, because it was the only choice you could live with? Jake was released from the hospital a few days later, but he couldn't work, couldn't lift his daughter without pain shooting through his side. The bills piled up again, the food ran low, and Jake felt the fear creeping back, the fear that he was failing. Emily stepped in without hesitation, moving into the small apartment to help, caring for the baby, cooking meals, cleaning the apartment that had been neglected for so long. She held the baby close, rocking her to sleep, whispering soft words of comfort that filled the silent spaces in the room. And one night, as Jake watched Emily hold his daughter, the baby's small hand resting on Emily's heart, Emily looked up, tears in her eyes. "There's something I need to show you," she said, her voice trembling. She reached into her bag and pulled out a letter, the envelope worn and creased from being held too many times. She handed it to Jake, her hands shaking. Jake opened the letter, the handwriting familiar, sending a shiver down his spine. It was his wife's handwriting. He read the words slowly, each one sinking into him, shaking him to his core. "If anything ever happens to me, please find Emily. She will love our baby like her own." Jake looked up at Emily, his vision blurred with tears, his heart pounding in his chest. Emily's voice was barely a whisper. "Your wife and I, we were friends. She helped me when I lost my daughter. She told me that if anything happened, she wanted me to be there for you and your baby." Jake couldn't speak. The weight of the letter, the truth, the hope, pressing down on him, filling him, breaking him, and healing him all at once. Have you ever discovered a truth that changed everything you thought you knew? Jake realized then that Emily wasn't just a stranger who had stepped in to help. She was a promise kept, a promise his wife had made, a promise that had found its way back to them. And as Jake sat there, his daughter sleeping peacefully in Emily's arms, he understood that sometimes family isn't about blood. It's about love, about promises, about showing up when it matters most. Emily had filled the empty space called Mom, not to replace, but to continue the love that started with a promise and grew into something neither of them expected. But this was just the beginning, because what Jake and Emily were about to build together would change everything. Jake stood in the doorway of the small living room, the letter from his wife still trembling in his hand. The apartment was quiet except for the soft breathing of his daughter, asleep in Emily's arms, her tiny chest rising and falling in a rhythm that brought peace to the room. The glow of the street lights outside cast gentle patterns on the wall, wrapping the space in a warm, quiet light. Have you ever felt the weight of love so strong it brought you to your knees? Jake felt that now. His knees buckled, and he lowered himself to the floor, pressing the letter to his chest as tears streamed down his face, tears he had held back for too long, tears he didn't know he needed to cry. Emily didn't say a word. She simply held the baby tighter, rocking her softly, letting the silence speak the words neither of them could find. For the first time since the day his wife died, Jake allowed himself to feel it all, the grief, the fear, the loneliness, and the hope that had never fully died, no matter how hard the world tried to crush it. And as he looked up, his eyes meeting Emily's, he saw her tears too, saw the pain she carried, the love she had to give, the promise she was here to keep. "Your wife loved you," Emily whispered, her voice trembling. "She loved this baby so much. She wanted you both to be okay." Jake nodded, unable to speak, the words caught in the lump in his throat. He looked at his daughter, her tiny fingers clutching Emily's necklace as she slept. And for the first time, he saw a future that wasn't filled with fear, but with hope. The next morning, the sun rose over the city, pouring light into the apartment as if the world itself was reminding them that every day is a chance to begin again. Emily was in the kitchen, making oatmeal while humming softly, the baby sitting in a second-hand high chair, giggling as she tried to grab the spoon. Jake stood in the doorway, watching them, a quiet smile on his face. The room felt different now. It felt alive, filled with warmth, with laughter, with the kind of peace he had long forgotten. Have you ever realized that letting someone in isn't weakness, but the bravest act of love you can give? Jake stepped forward, taking the spoon from Emily and feeding his daughter, her laughter filling the room, echoing against the cracked walls, turning the tiny apartment into a home. Emily stood beside him, her hand resting gently on his back, grounding him, reminding him that he wasn't alone anymore. They spent the day together, fixing the leaky faucet, organizing the baby's clothes, and planning small things like what to cook for dinner and which park they would take the baby to the next morning. Small things that felt like the beginning of something big, something beautiful. That evening, as the baby drifted off to sleep, Jake and Emily sat on the couch, the letter resting on the table between them, a silent promise, a reminder of the love that had brought them together. "I don't know how to do this," Jake whispered, his voice cracking. Emily reached for his hand, squeezing it gently. "We'll figure it out together." And in that moment, Jake knew they would. They would figure out how to build a life from the pieces left behind, how to honor the love that started it all, how to give his daughter the family she deserved. Because sometimes family is built from promises, from quiet acts of love, from the courage to let someone in when you need them the most. And as the night settled around them, Jake looked at Emily, gratitude and hope in his eyes, knowing this was just the beginning of a new chapter, one they would write together. But their story was only just beginning. Jake stood by the window, the soft morning light spilling across the small apartment, illuminating the tiny world he had built with trembling hands and a heart that refused to give up. Behind him, Emily was laughing softly, her hair falling over her shoulder as she tried to keep the baby from grabbing the spoon again. Oatmeal smearing across the baby's tiny face as she giggled. Have you ever stopped to realize that the life you're living, even in its quiet, messy moments, is a life worth fighting for? Jake felt that now. He felt it in the warmth of the room, in the softness of his daughter's laughter, in the calm strength of Emily's presence beside him. He felt it in the small things, the squeak of the high chair, the hum of the old fridge, the way the sunlight danced across Emily's hair as she rocked the baby to sleep. For so long, Jake had been afraid of failing, of being alone, of not being enough. But standing there, watching his daughter reach out for Emily, hearing the soft coo of contentment as she fell asleep in Emily's arms, Jake realized something important. He was not alone anymore. Family isn't always what we expect. Sometimes it comes in the form of a promise kept, a letter that finds its way home, a woman who steps in when the world feels too heavy, and a single dad who refuses to stop trying, no matter how hard the road becomes. Have you ever thought that your courage, your quiet persistence, your small acts of love could change everything? Because they can. Jake kissed his daughter's forehead, feeling the softness of her breath against his cheek, and turned to Emily, gratitude shining in his tired eyes. "Thank you," he whispered. Emily smiled, her eyes glistening, and simply nodded as if to say, "We're in this together." And they were, because love doesn't end when someone is gone. It finds new ways to live, to grow, to heal, It fills empty spaces with laughter, turns small apartments into warm homes, and gives second chances to hearts that thought they were done hoping. Jake knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. There would still be bills to pay, nights of worry, moments of fear, but now there would also be shared laughter, shared burdens, and the quiet, powerful truth that they were building a life together, a life rooted in love, in promises kept, and in the courage to let hope back in. If this story touched you, share it with someone who needs to remember that kindness still exists. That family can be found in the most unexpected places, and that your courage can change everything. And if you want to be part of our story family, subscribe and stay with us, because the next story we share might just be yours. Because sometimes the end of one story is just the beginning of another.